What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another quick tip video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about idiomatic writing. And essentially what that means is just how to write effectively for your orchestra and keeping in context with the limitations and basically writing for the best of the instrument. It's very easy to write inappropriately for certain instruments if we're not really sure of how they work and how they blend together as an entire orchestra. So I wanted to give you two quick tips today to kind of give you a head start on two things to look out for when we're writing for the orchestra. So number one is really an essential rule, basically, and that is to basically treat the instruments as having a finite set of limitations. And this is true for basically anything, but especially orchestral instruments when they're built with a specific range. You should be aware of the ranges in which the instrument sings the best. Okay? Now, obviously, some instruments like the cello, for example, they excel in the low registers, but they also have this beautiful soaring high register, which sounds gorgeous. And a lot of composers use this high register because it sounds very emotional and it has this certain richness that maybe a violin does not, for example. A flute, for example, it has really beautiful mid to high range, but the very lowest notes are basically inaudible in the context of a full orchestra. And so writing for those parts where, writing for the range where the flute is the most, beautiful and it's the most effective will naturally sound the best. So my first tip basically is to write for the strength of the instrument, and the range is a big factor, right? So let me just show you the very intro here, and I'll play you kind of the A section. And in the intro, you'll hear the trumpets playing the melody, okay? I'm starting on a C above middle C. Now for a trumpet, that's a very comfortable note to play. The highest note is going to be the very last note of the intro, and that's going to be the C above middle C. Now this is obviously a higher note, so it's not as comfortable for the trumpet player, but it's still playable. Their range can go way up actually, but what is sustainable and what is comfortable for the player? Well, if they're professional, most of it will be comfortable, or at least it'll be playable if you write within those limits, okay? It's always better to be a little bit safer if you're not sure. So let me just show you what it sounds like. So just listen for this melody line in the trumpet. So if these were real trumpet players playing, which they are, because these are these are samples. This is Cinebrass. I'm using the trumpet articulations. You can hear as the notes got higher and higher, you hear that little bit of strain introduced in the trumpet sound, in those short notes, right? And this is exactly what real players would do. They would naturally have a little bit of a harder time reaching the higher notes. Whereas when you first heard the C in the trumpet in the very beginning, it sounded relatively effortless and it just came across very nicely. So just keep this in mind. The more outside of the comfortable range you go, the less the instrument will speak and the less effective the player will also be, right? So, the player's comfortability and the instrument, like the best of the instrument, basically coincide with each other. I would say they're pretty much correlated. The more comfortable the player is, the more beautiful and expressive the instrument itself will be. Okay. Tip number 2 is also very important, especially in the case of the woodwinds and the brass, and that is breathing. Okay, and this is something when I hear a lot of beginner mock-ups, this is something they actually forget to consider. They write these beautiful long melody lines, but there's actually nowhere for those players to breathe. If they were to present this to a real orchestra, real players need to breathe. So just listen to this A section here, and I'll show you what this melody line I wrote. In this intro, you remember you hear these trumpet blasts, and then they have these rests, right? Like half rests and sometimes even whole rests. So this gives them ample time to breathe and just really get themselves prepared for the next bar. So have a listen to this. Breathe. Now here's the answer phrase. Breathe. Now the horn can take over. Breathe. Now, between that, that one horn phrase, the horn player might not even need to breathe there. So then he can breathe, right? So now the horn continues, and then the flute, I think the flute comes in, or is it? Yeah, the flute too comes in to layer on top of it, and then they work together. Now, the really cool thing is the more of the same instrument that is played together, the more chances people have to breathe. Because just because one horn player is breathing, if there's like 6 horn players playing together, the other 5 can still be holding the same note. So a lot of the times players will discuss with each other like when each person will breathe to get a fully sustained sound without any breaks in there. It really is a team effort. So when I'm writing these melody lines, I'm really keeping in mind when. So number one, like the range of the instrument and what will sing the best, and number two, when I can give the performers time to breathe and time to recover, because if in the course of a long piece, stamina is a big thing there, right? So you really want to make sure the performers are at their best at all times. So it's just very important. So those are basically the 2 very important tips for writing idiomatically for your instruments. If you want to get even deeper, you can study like orchestration books and stuff like that, where they tell you like which keys work better for which instruments. So generally, like string players like sharper keys, like anything between 1 to 4 sharps works really well. Brass players, because of the nature of how they're tuned and stuff, they can perform better in the flat keys. But professional players can really play anything, but it's just like being aware of these small, minute details if you're really trying to dig deep into orchestration. It's just good to read over in case you're interested. But hopefully these 2 tips really help, especially for MIDI orchestration. These are things that are very easy to skip over. We have the entire playable range available to us in the DAW, and then we see like, okay, let's just play these high notes all the time because they sound beautiful and they'll really stand out. Keep in mind, a real player is not going to always be comfortable playing in that high register for sustained long periods of time. So just things to think about. But hopefully that helps. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you tomorrow in another quick tip. Have a great day. Bye-bye.